Hello, my name is John White, and this is for pre-apprentice pile drivers to learn more about wood piles. Enjoy the clip. This video is to understand what wood piles are used for in the pile driving industry. Brought to you by John White and Vinny DeFabio of Payco Ventures. Payco is headquartered in Seattle, Washington, and has been a union shop since 1955 and is a member of Local 117. To become an expert at the different types of piles, we have to study what they are used for. The knowledgeable pile driver studies ancient history of pile driving, and we start with the Romans and what they did with wood piles. We know that in 50 BC, Caesar used wood piles for bearing piles to build a bridge. Let's review that project.
Caesar's soldiers methodically transformed local timber into an expanding bridge. The foundation of the bridge was a series of wooden piles driven into the bedrock of the river.
So there we have the first example of using wood piles as bearing piles to hold up bridges. The Romans drove these piles into the hard riverbed in order to reach the load bearing they needed to hold up the bridge. This is called a bearing pile, but it gets most of its bearing or its load capacity at the tip of the pile. So now we know the Romans used wood piles as end-bearing piles to hold up bridges. So end-bearing piles can be embedded in rock or in a very hard layer. But what do you do if you do not have a hard layer, such as a clay layer that could go on for hundreds of feet deep? The Romans had a solution for this, and they called it the friction pile. Let's study this friction pile the Romans invented. In the south of France sits a horse track stadium built by the Romans in 149 AD. The stadium is built on clay. There is no end-bearing soil below, and many of the buildings around this stadium have sunk, and that is why people got curious about why this structure refuses to sink into the ground. In the 1990s, a small portion of this stadium was cut and moved to reveal that it was standing on 30,000 wood piles. One of the amazing discoveries was that the piles were cut in octagon shapes to add friction to the clay soil. This is something that we still do today with octagon concrete piles. The Romans were aware that the very center of the tree was soft, so the tips curled away from the soft center. Each pile tip was burned to harden the tips. Close examination of the piles showed that the Romans serial numbered each pile and even stamped in the species of the pile. So up to this point, we've learned two ways to use wood piles, as end-bearing piles or friction piles. What are some of the other uses for wood piles? One of the things Caesar was afraid of when he built his bridge in 50 BC was that the enemy was going to go upstream and cut down trees and have them float down the river and wipe out his bridge. So he built protection piles or fender piles in front of his bridges. Fender piles are driven all over the world today, and they are high maintenance, so you will get involved in driving fender piles if you're a pile driver. Wood piles are also used for floating docks. The pile does not hold up the dock, it just secures the dock in place as it floats up and down with the tide. Let me just jump in here and say these type of piles that are not bearing piles. In other words, there's not a building sitting on it and bearing down on it. These are non-bearing piles that we're talking about here. Another use for wood piles is to moor boats, like these two boats in Italy. The Romans used wood piles as pinch piles. They would drive the piles very close together and pinch the soil and increase the soil's capacity with regards to load bearing. And this method is still used today. Wood piles have been used for seawalls and bulkheads or to hold back any kind of lateral load. This video was to show you all the uses of wood piles, but wood piles do have their problems. They often get damaged during the installation process. Pile tips are available to install on the end of the pile to protect it during driving. After the piles are driven, there are special caps that can be placed on top of the pile to add life. Special pile wraps have been developed to repair the sides of piles. Experienced pile drivers should know the history of wood piles, but wood piles are being replaced due to environmental reasons, and in the next video we will go over new types of piles. Here's what we've learned in this video. We now know about end-bearing piles, friction piles, fender piles, floating dock piles, mooring piles, seawall and bulkhead piles, and pinch piles. Thank you for watching this training video. I just want to say to all of you watching this video, my name is John White, and you can call me anytime, night or day, at 206-495-7030 with your questions about pile driving equipment or anything to do with the deep foundation industry. Just give me a call anytime. Thank you.